There was a story you might have missed last week that I have been busting to talk to you both about, right? Because it's very divisive and I feel like we're not going to all agree. Here's what happened. Year 9 students in South Australia were given a debate topic. Did either of you do debating at school?
No.
Holly, you would have been great at it.
I didn't go to the kind of school where you got to do things like that.
In Australia, all the schools do. Like they offer it, but only the uncool kids do it, which is why I loved it. That's how I spent my Friday nights doing my debating. How about you, Mia?
I did a lot of debating, but not in the formal sense. So I wasn't part of a debate
more
team.
with your mum.
Yeah.
Oh, I did a lot of that.
Yeah.
I did a lot of debating why I should be allowed to stay out later.
Yes.
Stuff like that.
Yes. Well, I did debating, and there's 3 speakers and it's very kind of formal and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, the way it works is that there's a topic and there's an affirmative team and a negative team. You don't get to choose.
I know how debating works.
No, but not everybody does.
Not everyone does.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Look at you debating. You're getting angry.
Exactly.
Come on, take a deep breath.
I didn't do debating, but I know what a debate means.
need to stretch.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Do I need to stretch?
Do your stretching, sweetie. The debate topic was that the Tradwife movement is good for women, right? So one team's going to be given affirmative, one negative.
I know this will irritate me, but so the way it works is there's a statement like the Tradwife movement and then 3 of you have to argue, yes, the Tradwife movement is good for women, and 3 of you have to argue, no, the Tradwife movement is bad for women, and you don't get to choose.
You don't get to choose. Drawn
These
out of a
days
hat.
that would annoy people a great deal.
It would. Holly.
How old are
It
the
would.
kids that are debating this, and are they boys or girls or mixed?
Year 9, so I'm going to say 15,
14-ish,
14,
yeah.
15, and mixed.
Okay.
Then came the backlash. So some on social media said this would force women to argue for their own subjugation. Other called the not-for-profit, the organisation that does it, not-for-profit, called them on the phone, yelled at them and said, this is ridiculous, this is sexist, which doesn't feel in the spirit of debating. But anyway, Debating South Australia got a shock. They came out and said that they were using the word tradwife as interchangeable with a stay-at-home mother.
Well, that's their first mistake, because anyone who is literate in the world of tradwives, and I am way too literate in the world of they are not the same thing.
Explain the difference.
So a stay-at-home mother, which is not a popular term now anyway, is anyone whose main job is looking after their kids. Tradwives are literally monetizing the performance of home life that can be anything from making bread from scratch. Tradwives are people whose identity is very much tied up with a very traditional version of homemaking that usually also involves making all your food from scratch, eschewing sort of any processed food, maybe even conventional education. You
So like
dress a
Megan.
certain way. Also, a part of the tradwife thing, rightly or wrongly, is that you are subjugated to your husband. The husband is the head of the house. There is not a tradwife model where the husband is not the head of the house.
So,
you also have to have a husband. So a stay-at-home mum could be any kind of family model, any kind of thing. A tradwife is a very specific thing.
And you're right. I was being facetious about Megan because tradwives, the idea is, you're right, they don't earn money. So it's all about very traditional gender roles. And whether they do that on the internet or not, it's about traditional gender roles.
The Debating Association actually wrote to schools and said what we meant was a traditional wife. It is not about submission to a man inside the home. It's about someone who stays at home and looks after kids. Mia.
How did they feel like a baby wandering into a wood? Like, I didn't know that I was going to tread on a big spike and a bear might eat me. It's like, guys,
What I'll
you don't
say-
start talking about tradwives without people getting upset.
What I will say though,
It's like Seema driving over the spikes.
about the
Like, come on.
process of debating is that your first speaker, one of the first things you do, because there's a whole strategy, there's a whole process. First thing you got to do, definition.
Yeah.
You have to get up and the worst kind of debates are what we call definitional debates. And that's when one team defines it as one thing and the other defines it as something else.
Why is that a bad debate? Because you're not arguing
Because you're not
about
arguing the same thing.
Apples and oranges.
And often, and we call it, I used to do adjudicating for debating as well. We end up calling it an even if debate. And what we do is we say, even if you define tradwife as blah, I'm going to start arguing on your terms. Because otherwise, very unsatisfying, unproductive debate if we're just arguing about definitions, which I would say, well, shouldn't we all be going back there? Because the definitional debate, the thing, I don't think some people branding themselves as tradwife mean the same thing as these tradwives. Like sitting down and debating the definition of tradwife is an interesting, important process, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But the point here, or at least as far as I see it, is that debating tradwives is incredibly valid, right? They are, just as we just talked about, this sort of girl boss bitch archetype that seems to be looming at the minute. Tradwife is definitely another. There is a lot of content out there about that. It is very much an aspirational model of womanhood that's out there. It is not the same as I don't have a paying job at the minute and I'm looking after kids. And the thing is I think they thought it was, but it's not. And so I know that's a definitional debate, but that was their first mistake.
Mia, would you call the school and make a little comment?
It was funny because when you first told us about this morning in the planning meeting, I was like, oh, that's ridiculous. That's just what a debate is. Sometimes you have to argue things
you don't agree with.
Argue for things that you don't agree with. That's the whole point. And that's the skill of being a debater, that you have to be able to debate something regardless of what you personally believe. But then I read a little bit more. I read some commentary from Rebecca Sparrow, who published an email on her Facebook page. She's like writes a lot about teen girls and
schools,
and speaks in schools about friendship and other things. And this email from someone who was objecting to it basically said, you've got, at a time when there is the Andrew Tate of it all, and there are some pretty controversial, troubling ideas we saw in adolescence. Mm-hmm. If you look at that as the backdrop here, teachers, schools, parents, girls and boys are all having a lot of trouble working with these issues, right, about girls and boys. So to overlay that on it, it almost feels like during the time of the marriage equality debate, having a debate about whether same-sex marriage should be allowed, or whether same-sex marriage is bad for the world. It feels very, very fraught in a way that is kind of beyond an actual debate.
That's such an interesting point.
Isn't that the point of debating, though, to be fraught? I mean, we would debate things about like lowering the voting age or whatever, but then climate change or smoking or vegetarianism. In order to know what you think about something, and this is a philosophical principle, you need to be able to put words around the other side, right? Yeah. And let's imagine too that you have a 15 or a 16-year-old boy who is like our boy from adolescence, right? Yeah. And he has those traditional ideas. What if he gets the negative and that boy has to stand up and argue that being a tradwife isn't good for women? And that's an exercise for him to consider the other side. And they have to listen to each other.
Except he won't. This is what we're learning, that people tend to screen out things they don't agree with and tune into things they do agree with.
Well, that's what they do on social media, but the whole point of a debate is that you actually put everything on the table, and the rules of a debate, which don't exist on bloody TikTok and on most podcasts I listen to, is that you go, okay, these are my arguments. This is my evidence. I'm going to refute what you said, and I am not going to bring up anything personal. I'm going to just talk about the facts, and you come to a conclusion. And I think that often some middle ground can be found.
So I respect that, and I entirely agree that any strongly held opinion that you hold, being literate in the opposition to it is essential, right? I 100% agree, and I think it's one of the things that we've lost in public debate. Certainly not the first person to say that. However, I also very much can see what Mia's saying, because one of the things that's always troubled me about debates is that just because you can mount a good argument doesn't make you right. You know what I mean? Like, there is no argument in the world that would convince me of some things. Do you know what I mean? Just because you are really smart and really clever and you've cherry-picked the right facts and you've made a great joke that made everybody laugh. No, it doesn't mean you don't debate it. But the problem with presenting debating as a competition where always one side wins and one side loses is I don't think that proves that the argument was wrong. So I could never, just because of my own personal prejudices probably, I would love to be in a debate about tradwives, but there isn't actually an argument in the world that would make me think that it was a wondrul thing for my daughter to be a tradwife. Do you know what I mean?
Jessie, playing it out, so the side that has to argue that tradwives are make the world better and that subjugating women and traditional gender roles are better for the world, they're just better debaters
Yeah.
and they win.
Exactly.
So what message, and I know what you're saying, and I'm not, and again, I see both sides, which is why I'm probably a terrible debater.
Same.
What message does that send? Because you're right, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's true, but when you're talking about kids.
And the boys at school
Yeah.
then saying to the girls at school, like, Tradwives are great. We won that debate. You guys don't know what you're talking about. Like, I can see why. I'm not saying they shouldn't debate. I don't think anything should be off the table as such. But I can see why a school setting with boys and girls of that age where, as Mia's already pointed out, relations are quite fraught, right? Don't really want to bring that into their world. I can understand that, even though I can see that philosophically losing the art of debating is a terrible thing. But I also think that presenting it as a purely competitive sport almost and dealing with really big life and death cultural issues is not great for a bunch of 14-year-olds who live on TikTok.
I don't think it is life or death cultural. I don't think that is life. I think that there are a lot of things that are currently in the zeitgeist that I would say that is not for a year 9 debate. Like, absolutely. But this one, if we assume that this is in their world anyway, that they have to define it, they have to grapple with it, they have to deal with the facts, they have to argue whichever way they want to say it's good for women or it's bad for women. When someone wins a debate, it is not because the adjudicator thinks they were right. It's because of how they fashion the argument.
Yeah, exactly. But it will be interpreted as that they were right.
I'm not sure. I think that you want to keep these kids engaged in these topics, right? And a lot of them can be quite boring and stale. And so I just think that it's more, to me, it is more about the process of the debate, and I think that both sides have lost that entirely, and it might be controversial and it might make for some awkward moments, but at least they are going with like principled argumentation that isn't you're a girl and you belong in the kitchen. That wouldn't
agree with
stand.
you.
And it's civil discourse. Isn't that what we're trying to model to kids as well?
And I do agree with all of that. And I think I misspoke before when I said life or death issue, because you're right. This isn't necessarily, but I think the reason why it takes me there is because it troubles me a lot that in the world of a 14, 15-year-old girl, and obviously I have skin in this game, there is still some kind of live debate out there about whether or not she should be allowed to have autonomy over her choices and whether or not she makes money and whether or not her gender should define what she does.
See, but that might be the argument
really
for
upsets me a lot. So that's probably why I get and the thing is in theory, in a lovely theoretical sense, it's great to debate that. But in the rough and tumble of a high school, I totally, in lots of ways I agree with you, Jessie, but I think that the parents who were calling and the people who are upset, I also can see why, because I don't think I would love it if my daughter was coming home and saying, we were on the women should be able to live however they want to live aside and we lost and now you know what I mean? Like it's
interesting.
tricky.
It's one to really chew over. Out Louders, I'm fascinated to know what you think. I keep flicking around and around. You can tell who's the debater here because Holly and I but on the other hand,
we're very grey area.